Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're tracking a really massive economic shift that's happening right under our noses. And to truly grasp it, we actually have to look at a map. For decades now, the story we've been told is that manufacturing left the US for cheaper labor overseas, right? Well, right now, companies are completely recalculating that. They're reopening plants, building brand new ones, and bringing production closer to home in what's becoming a massive reshoring boom. And a huge chunk of this activity is returning to a place a lot of people wrote off long ago, the American Midwest. So today we're going to explore exactly why that is happening.
Now, you might be wondering, if the global system of cheap labor and overseas supply chains is still up and running, why is manufacturing coming back at all? And more importantly, why do places that seem, well, completely random? Take a place like Ashland, Ohio. It has absolutely no skyline, no major airport. At first glance, there's literally no reason for this place to matter in the global economy. Yet, it is perfectly positioned. Because in the world of modern manufacturing, the places that truly matter usually don't look flashy. They're just in the right spot at the right time.
Just to put this into perspective, 20,000. That's it. That is Ashland's entire humble population. It's a tiny footprint, yet this small town is turning out to be an incredible anomaly in the massive shift of global supply chains. You see, it isn't located inside some wildly expensive metro area, the land is cheaper, the warehousing is cheaper, and the labor is highly competitive. But to really understand why a town of 20,000 people is suddenly a key player in a multi-billion-dollar industrial shift, we have to look at what happens when you place Ashland on the map. Think about what happens when you draw a 300-mile circle around this town. You instantly capture Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Toronto, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. Expand that to a 500-mile radius, and suddenly you're hitting New York, Philadelphia, Nashville, and Atlanta. Within a single day's drive, you can reach 1/3 of North America's entire population and a massive share of its industrial demand. That's not just a cute small-town perk. That is a massive, invisible structural advantage that offers unbelievable access at a fraction of the cost.
So let's dive into Section 1, Built on Geography, and how proximity created a regional system. Because this massive geographic advantage definitely wasn't built by luck, and it wasn't built by policy either. It was built entirely by geography.
If we think back to the early 20th century, the system worked seamlessly, like a giant puzzle. You had iron ore pouring out of Minnesota and coal coming straight out of Appalachia. When these two massive raw material streams met along the Great Lakes, it forged this incredibly powerful system of steel production. And once you had steel, well, everything else just naturally clustered tightly around it. Cars, machines, infrastructure in cities like Cleveland, Detroit, and Chicago, all supported by hundreds of smaller towns like Ashland, churning out specialized components. Everything from materials to labor to suppliers had to stay close to function. It worked beautifully because, back then, distance really mattered.
Right, but then we entered an era that's often called the death of distance. Container shipping suddenly made moving goods across oceans incredibly cheap. Global supply chains made it super easy to completely separate where a good was produced from where it was actually consumed. And when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, this shift accelerated violently. Between 2000 and 2010, Ohio alone lost more than 400,000 manufacturing jobs, just gone. And that wasn't over a century, that was in a single decade. Cheap global labor had temporarily outweighed the cost of geography.
Which brings us to Section 2. The global system breaks, and the illusion of free distance shatters. For nearly 30 years, the global economy basically ran on one very simple assumption. Distance didn't really matter anymore. If you could make something a penny cheaper on the exact opposite side of the world, you just did it, because shipping was reliable. Until, of course, it completely wasn't.
The crucial takeaway here is that the system didn't just break all at once. It unraveled piece by piece. A factory shuts down in China. A massive port backlog clogs up California. And, who could forget that single cargo ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal? Suddenly, production lines thousands of miles away stopped dead in their tracks. Not because people stopped buying things, but because a single breakdown literally anywhere in the chain means everything downstream just stops. It proved definitively that distance was a massive problem again.
And beyond just the physical logistics of moving boxes around, the whole geopolitical environment fundamentally changed. Relying heavily on a single country stopped looking like this brilliant cutting-edge efficiency optimization, and it started looking like massive geopolitical exposure. Even if the overseas system works seamlessly 90% of the time, companies quickly realized they simply could no longer afford the devastating risk of that 10% when it doesn't.
So the entire equation basically flipped upside down. Under the old assumption, distance was treated as free, so you optimized strictly for the cheapest labor you could find. But today, the new reality is that distance has a steep cost. Even if labor happens to be cheaper abroad, that advantage shrinks instantly when you start factoring in time, risk, and coordination. Add in surging shipping costs and new automation, where robots are kind of reducing the need for cheap human labor anyway, and suddenly, geography absolutely matters again.
And let me tell you, the market is reacting to this new math in a huge way. 2 million. That is the number of manufacturing jobs announced as reshored or brought back through foreign investment just since 2010. And it's really vital to understand that these aren't the same low-cost, low-skill factories that packed up and left decades ago. We're talking high-tech, capital-intensive operations. Companies aren't stepping backward, they're just recalculating based on the true cost of distance. Moving right along to Section 3, the return to geography, and exactly why the Midwest is actually beating out the Sun Belt for this reshoring wave. Now, you might assume all this shiny new manufacturing is heading straight down south, right? But a lot of these returning operations are looking right past the booming Sun Belt and turning back to the Midwest.
It all comes down to a really fascinating trade-off. The Sun Belt definitely gets all the headlines. Places like Texas and South Carolina offer lower taxes and explosive growth. But for modern, just-in-time manufacturing, distance is your ultimate constraint. Sure, a factory in Texas might be cheaper to build on day one, but every extra mile you have to ship to your inland customers adds time and, more importantly, risk. The Midwest solves this with one of the densest freight networks in the entire world. You've got Interstate 71, 75, 80, and 90 all converging right there. Being that much closer to suppliers and customers drastically reduces delays and cuts down on inventory coordination time.
Let's bring it back to our anomaly town, Ashland, Ohio, for a second. What makes a place like this so incredibly resilient is that unlike cities that relied entirely on just steel or just autos, Ashland's manufacturing system never fully broke. Instead, it spread its risk across dozens of smaller, specialized producers. Today, it has over 80 manufacturers making really unflashy but absolutely essential things, like industrial adhesives and water systems. Because it never suffered that one single headline-making factory collapse that wiped out the town, it managed to hold on to something incredibly hard to replicate, a generational workforce of highly skilled machinists and process engineers. The system didn't die, it just adapted.
And we're literally seeing this proximity play out in real time right now. Just 50 miles south of Ashland, a massive $20 billion semiconductor complex is taking shape near Columbus. Now, a facility of that mind-boggling magnitude doesn't just operate in a vacuum. It requires precision parts, specialized materials, and logistics support from suppliers who need to be close by. We're talking within hours, not days. This is exactly where places like Ashland, sitting right on that dense infrastructure network, plug perfectly back into the modern economy.
So it turns out the Midwest wasn't built by accident. It was built for a system where location matters. And the geographic logic that made the Midwest so intensely valuable a century ago never actually disappeared. It was just waiting for distance to matter again. Now that supply chain risk and geopolitical exposure are top of mind for everyone, the places that were originally built around proximity are suddenly overwhelmingly relevant again. We are literally watching the calculus of global trade change in real time. The era of just ignoring the cost of distance is officially over. But here's the thing, as the friction of moving goods around the globe continues to increase, manufacturing is really just the beginning. It leaves us to wonder, what else? What other industries, resources, and critical day-to-day systems are we soon going to be forced to bring closer to home? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep your eyes on the map as this fascinating geographic shift continues to unfold.